In the Vietnam War, the total number of American deaths is 400,000 soldiers and more than 1,340,000 wounded, and the total number of Vietnamese deaths is estimated at 1,650,000 soldiers. The Vietnam War is the name of the series of operations and military conflict that occurred from 1955 to 1975 between the forces of North Vietnam and the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam on the one hand, and the forces of South Vietnam and its allies, especially the United States of America, on the other hand. Simultaneously and related to this war, other proxy wars were going on in Laos and Cambodia between US-backed forces against communist forces. In the end, with the withdrawal of the United States and the Laos Civil War, the Cambodian Civil War, and the Vietnam War ended, and all these countries found communist governments. The American government, during the presidency of Dwight Eisenhower, considered the presence of US military forces in Vietnam as a way to prevent the spread of influence and control of communism in South Vietnam, following the domino theory. According to the principle of falling dominoes, if a region becomes communist, it will pull down the surrounding regions and put them under the control of the Soviet Union or the People's Republic of China, helping to expand the territory of communists and reducing the territory of capitalist states. Government of North Vietnam was fighting for unification under the communist rule. They considered the conflict as a colonial war only against the French colonial forces. But when the United States joined South Vietnam, they changed the conflict to a war against the entire government of South Vietnam, which they called an American puppet government. During World War II, Indochina was occupied by Japanese forces and the power of French forces was temporarily reduced. With the defeat of Japan at the end of the war, the national forces as well as the communists of Vietnam demanded an independence of Vietnam. And on September 2, 1945, Ho Chi Minh announced the formation of the independent country of Vietnam in Hanoi. The French forces that came out of the captivity of the Japanese forces tried again to gain their dominance in Indochina and Vietnam. This was faced with the resistance of the Vietnamese forces under the command of Ho Chi Minh, and the wars known as the First Vietnam War broke out. 1950, American President Truman sent 35 members of the Military Assistance and Advisory Group to train and advise France to maintain its colonial role in Vietnam. In 1954, the Viet Minh forces inflicted a severe defeat on the French forces in Dien Bien Phu, and as a result, France consented to the independence of its three colonial countries, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, at the Geneva Conference. But in the agreements of the Geneva Conference, Vietnam was temporarily divided into two parts, northern and southern. Was divided apparently the goal was to determine the responsibility of the government in this country after voting. The government of South Vietnam under the leadership of Ngo Dinh Diem refused to participate in negotiations regarding the arrangements for this vote, encouraged by the United States. During this period, the government of South Vietnam, with the support of the United States, severely suppressed the communists, and many people were executed on the charge of being communists. With the support of China and Soviet Union to the forces of Viet Cong and North Vietnam, as well as the support of the United States and its allies to the forces of South Vietnam, the conflicts in Vietnam escalated and gradually turned into a major war throughout Vietnam and sometimes in other parts of Indochina. Since the early 1960s, when Kennedy took office, the first American troops were sent to South Vietnam under the title of advisor, without China or the Soviet Union sending troops to North Vietnam. With the advent of Johnson, the staff of advisors became an organized division. After North Vietnam's alleged attack on U.S. naval vessels in 1964, the U.S. began regular aerial bombing of the North. And from 1965, a large army entered South Vietnam and began to suppress the Viet Cong. It seems that the American strategy from this point on was to force the North to stop helping the Viet Cong in the South and to eradicate the Viet Cong in the South. In 1968, Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces launched massive attacks across South Vietnam to coincide with Tet and the beginning of the Vietnamese Year, which became known as the Tet Offensive. Although these attacks were not very successful from a military point of view, their extensiveness and intensity, as well as their news coverage around the world and especially inside the United States, mobilized public opinion strongly against America and led to anti-war demonstrations in the United States. When Nixon took office, the United States was forced to start peace negotiations almost from 1969 due to numerous failures and the lack of recognition of the Viet Cong from ordinary people and the lack of complete familiarity with the region and the tactics of irregular warfare in which the Viet Cong were very skilled and successful, and left the task of defending the government of South Vietnam to that government itself. Of course, the aforementioned reasons were not the main reasons for leaving the war, but the internal pressures and growing opposition in America itself were the main reason. The resistance of the Northerns and their refusal to surrender to the American bombing was also the reason. This war officially ended according to the Paris Peace Accords in 1973, but continued after the withdrawal of American troops. Of course, the Northerns had offered to negotiate in 1965, but the Americans had not accepted the terms of the negotiations. On April 30, 1975, North Vietnamese forces captured Saigon, and the Vietnam War ended. In 1976, the election of the National Assembly paved the way for the reunification of North and South Vietnam. It is noteworthy that North Vietnam had never attacked South Vietnam until 1975, and this country's policy from the beginning until 1975 was to equip the Viet Cong and support them comprehensively. America never invaded North Vietnam, perhaps from the fear of China and the Soviet Union. In summary, among the results of this war, the following can be mentioned. Number 1. The victory of the Communist forces. Number 2. The withdrawal of U.S. coalition forces from Vietnam in 1973 after the Paris Peace Agreement. Number 3. Communist forces take power in South Vietnam, Cambodia and Laos. Number 4. The beginning of the crisis of South Vietnam brought refugees to capitalist countries. Number 5. The beginning of the Cambodian genocide by the communists. The involved parties are divided into two categories. Number 1. Communist forces. North Vietnam, Viet Cong, the Soviet Union, China, Bangladesh, Laos, North Korea, Khmer Rouge. Number 2. Anti-communist forces. South Vietnam, United States of America, South Korea, Australia, Philippines, New Zealand, Republic of Khmer, Thailand, Myanmar, Kingdom of Laos, World Liberation Military Forces.